covers, in many ways, how I ended up on the team, though, because sort of this kind of sucked me into LaTeX programming. We'll start with a little history lesson. So, in days of yore, when CTT was more active, people used to post lots of problems there, and I used to try and solve them. So, in 2007, a guy called Stefan Pinot posted a question there about a predecessor package called siunits, where he's come up with this problem, and it's to do with the fact that if you use typesetting stuff in text mode, so not in math mode, the minus sign in this unit down here was coming out as a hyphen, not a minus, and the package was supposed to deal with that, and it didn't. And I read this, and I looked at the code, and I thought, oh, this is quite solvable. So I came back. Oh, have we got? No, I haven't got that. So I came back and I said, I answered that and said, oh, well, this is what you want to do to solve this particular problem. I'll talk to the package maintainer and ask him to fix it. So this is held on. And he came back to me by private email and said something along the lines of, I don't have time to maintain this package anymore, knock yourself out. Yeah, so then I sat down. So you'll see there's two packages loaded here. There's this one, siunits. Oh, has this one got, no, this one's got si style. There's two packages, siunits and si style. It's not there. And they were kind of used together a lot by people. And I sat down and I thought, well, you know, if we're going to fix this, I should probably try and, this is all a bit messy and some of the interfaces aren't great. And so I said, this is possibly the most foolish email post I've ever made to CTT. I said, oh, you know, I've been having a look at this, and I fixed this particular issue, but I was thinking, anyone got any wider requirements that they might like me to look at? So you'll see, I said, I talked to the, so what happened is there'd been a public post from the guy who wrote SI style, and you might be wondering why are the two packages there. It's to do with the fact that siunits was about the idea that it's attractive in TeX to give units little macro names like /meter, /kilogram. And it basically did that and did some stuff for formatting them. And SI style is about the fact that there are certain, let's call them guidelines, about how one should typeset units. They should be in an upright font. They shouldn't follow the surrounding bold because they're mathematical entities. And the two people they'd written them separately and they did different things, but you could use the two together. And they'd got different interfaces. And there were some issues, specific issues I'll come to in a minute about siunits in particular. And I'd looked at it, and so the maintainer there had come back and said, well, if you're picking up siunits, you could pick up SI style as well, because I haven't got any time either. And I said, oh, I could, you know, I was thinking, we want is the initial plan was to add some stuff to SI style. I think that was the initial plan. And I thought, what features might people want? And then I've deliberately cut off where I had my list of things I thought of, because people came up with all sorts of things that they'd thought of I should do. So I realised I needed to. So you'll see, I'll just point out down here, as well as siunits and SI style, I'd picked up numprints, units, which is the longest standing units package I know of in LaTeX. It's got the most simple names, it's not surprising. Units def. HEP units, that's high energy physics units. There are a few others as well I've learnt of subsequently. And I sort of I thought I'd look at those and see what ideas they had. And so this was, you'll see this was November 2007. And by basically ripping off most of the code from siunits and SI style shamelessly, by February of 2008, we got to the very first public release. So which I called v0.6 because it was a testing release, and I sent to CTAN, and I just called it SI because I thought that the name was getting a bit long. That rapidly became obvious this was not a great plan, which is why it's no longer. That's the only release that went to CTAN. Maybe no, there was v0.6a that went as SI as well, but the rest of them went as siunitx. The idea really, what I wanted to do. Did I say that on the next slide? Oh, no. OK, so what I really wanted to do was two things. So the first thing was to have a single interface for setting all the possible different ways you could control these things. So, for example, if you're going to start worrying about the font that you're using, should should the code completely ignore the surrounding font, or should it say, well, if it's in a people sometimes, particularly if it's in a heading, you might want it to follow the bold, even though mathematically you shouldn't be making things bold if they're not vectors or whatever. So you want a setting for that. And then you want a setting to say, should you print it in math mode, or maybe you want to use the text mode font because the text mode font looks very different from the math mode font. Or should you print your units such that a reciprocal is to the power -1, or should you print it as a slash, so meters/seconds? So I wanted a key val interface for that, because the predecessor packages all had lots of separate macros, each of which set one of those things, and each of which had a completely unmemorable name, some of which were incredibly long. So I wanted a key val interface. And the other thing, and the thing which I always regard as the central competence of siunitx, but nobody else does, and I'm aware of that, is that siunits would let you write unit macros with little names, but what it wouldn't do is when you had a join between them, there should be a bit of space. And it expected you to put a little macro in there called USK, which was unit space correction or something. And you had to put those in manually between each unit. And you had to predefine any compound units, you had to predefine a macro for that, some of which it provided like about 50, some of which had got really awkward names. And I thought, look, if I can sit and read a list of macros, and I can work out meters, seconds, or joules per mole per Kelvin, it's my favourite unit, it's day job related. If I can work out there should be some spaces in that where the joins are, then the computer can work out where the joins are if I work out the right algorithm. So the bit of siunitx, which has come all the way through, so this was the first thing I wrote for version 0.6, and it's the bit which wasn't in any of the predecessor packages, and it's the bit that I like the best, is the fact that the unit processor, the ability to do that, which is essentially, other than some changes in style, is more or less unchanged from this version, and it comes all the way through. Anyway, so I wrote this, and just before I wrote this, so in the January, after I'd written most of the core code, and I'd written units, you'd see, I'm going to point back to that previous slide. Right, there's two packages on this list which are missing, because I hadn't initially put them in scope. And those two packages are to do with numbers in tables. And numbers in tables have been the bane of my life for the past 10 years. Because that's what everyone else thinks siunitx is for. The things that aren't listed here are David Carlisle's D column, which is very clever and very fast at doing numerical alignment, provided you only want to do some, you just need to hit the decimal marker. And a package called rccol, which I don't imagine many people use nowadays, and people haven't heard of, maybe. It's a right-centered column, which I, again, if we could, got pointed to in like the January of my development of the first version of siunitx. And someone said, well, if you're going to do all this number processing, you could do tabular alignment as well while you're at it. I wish I'd said no. Yeah, when we come to the thanks about ripping code off, I'll cover that. So yeah, then we go forward a bit. So again, CTT, here's the announcement. First version of siunitx, version 1.0, 16th of April 2008. So it's roughly 10 years old now, which why I thought this was a good place to talk about it. So you'll see we've stuck. So yes, we've got the name now, and the tagline has stuck. And yeah, I'm going to emphasise there's no numbers or tables mentioned in this tagline. It's a units package. So what are the core features? So parsing and formatting units. So the idea that we can take these little unit macros, or you can do some auto formatting of just, some people don't like that idea. It's too long. I don't want to write /meet or even /m. I just want to type an M and a dot and then an S and then a -1, and it should automatically work out. And that comes from SI style because it allowed both input formats, and I've stuck with that. Single key value interface, I've mentioned that. Automated number formatting, so that's the idea of things like if you have exponents, it's very convenient not to have to write /times 10 to the whatever. You can just put E, as one might type in lots of other places. So that's all doable, and separating out digits into digit groupings, which is some code I've got from numprint, ultimately. Tabular alignment, oh God. So what was wrong with version 1? So this is where we got to in version 1. So this is the last. So on my laptop, I have every single version of siunitx version 1 because that was all done in an SVN, which is no longer accessible because it was on a system which is subsequently got closed down. So I have them all separately, and this is the very last release of the version 1 stream. So this, it only did, you'll see it's about 2 years. What was wrong with version 1? Yeah, so other than the unit passing, which is unique to siunitx, more or less all the other internals were me taking stuff from other packages, minor changes to make it more consistent, and then putting it all together in one place. So it wasn't all that great. I learned a lot of tech programming between version 0.6 and version 1.43, and looking back, I was like, oh dear, this wasn't such a great plan. Suboptimal, yeah, the key vals. So the key vals I picked for version 1 were kind of based on things that the sort of stub names from SI style in particular, and they were all very short. Looking back at them, they weren't great choices because the idea was that people have not that much typing to do, but normally you're setting them in the preamble as a one-off, and they weren't that descriptive. Yeah, internally it was a complete disaster zone, and quite a lot of, particularly the loops, were really slow and not very good, and so there was quite a lot of performance problems. And I got feature requests. I looked at it and I was like, well, I can't really deal with these feature requests in version 1. It was just horrible. So I decided to rewrite completely from scratch, which the LaTeX team know is one of my favourite activities. Right, yes, it's all Will's fault. So I started. So the use of Expo3 in siunitx is Will's suggestion. So the initial plan, and I did start on this, was to just rewrite using sort of what we might call classical tech programming, so at as an internal symbol and whatever. And I'd got a decent distance through doing this, so it was just a cleaner version of the same stuff, basically. But so Will pointed me to Expo3 at that point, and at that point it wasn't that widely used. I think you were using it in FontSpec by then?
To go back and check.
Yeah, but yeah. But the core ideas were very solid, and so the email went like, have you looked at this Expo3 stuff? What do you make of it, or something along those lines? It was a very short email because Will and I had interacted a few times before that about various things. And so I had a look, and I was like, oh, yeah, there's some good ideas here, but I don't want to have a dependency on this massive library of stuff. So what I'll do is I'll take each idea, and I'll write it out myself in a sort of header part. It turned out there was an awful lot of good ideas, which I needed basically all of, and I ended up rewriting them all myself. And I got a decent. I haven't got this in version control because I was just sort of doing this in parallel with having version 1. And I got a decent distance through this before I decided that this was a complete waste of my time, because I was spending more time recoding stuff that already worked and just basically copying it and just changing the naming in it than I was writing anything new. So I decided to scrub that and actually to go for it in Expo3. So at the time, there wasn't a key val module for Expo3, and so in parallel with the sort of rewrite, I didn't really want, so I'd used xkeyval for version 1, and keyval interfaces are very good, but xkeyval's own interface is interesting. And there are some issues with how xkeyval works and how it takes over from keyval, and I decided I didn't want to do that. So it was going to be just keyval or something I wrote myself, basically. And so I ended up writing a keyval package, which I called keys3, and I was like, well, what do you think of this? And that was kind of my application to join the LaTeX team in many ways, because that's now L3 keys in Expo3. So I wrote that in parallel with the rewrite. So it's got a new answer. So version 2 does have some idea of more structured internals, because I kind of knew what features I might want to implement at that stage. Improved performance. So switching from my own stuff to a lot of the loops and things from Expo3 actually improved the performance a lot. There were other aspects as well, but it was quite a bit faster at the time. Which sort of takes us to why rewrite it again. So this is the current release on CTAM. So 2.7s. What's wrong with that? Okay, so there's a few things. So the thing that's driving me fundamentally is in siunitx version 2, version 1, inherit ideas from SI style about how you decide on what font to use for typesetting material. And those assumptions work fine for documents in Computer Modern and PDF Tech. They become increasingly problematic when you have different fonts, and particularly when you move to open type situation, so Unicode math fonts, because the entire structure of those fonts and the way that they work is just totally different. They're a single font, and you have different things like bold and whatever. It's just completely different handling, and you see that with people trying to apply font requirements to siunitx at the moment. So I've completely rethought that area, and that's problematic in the sense it's going to mean it's going to break some documents, but I think in the long term that's necessary. Development of exportable free ideas. So when I started on siunitx v2, the fact that the team wanted internal and public code level interfaces hadn't really worked. It was probably in Frank's mind, but it certainly wasn't in my mind. And so there aren't really any documented code level interfaces at the moment. And that's not only a problem because it means I can't point to them for other people, it's also a bit of a problem for me because it's quite large and there's quite a lot of interaction between different bits. And although I improved that for version 2, I didn't improve it enough. The internals are still too messy. There's still too much needing to know what happens in the unit processor to do the numbers or the tables or whatever, or to do the angles, and this is problematic. The only tests at the moment are it's the manual. That's why the manual has all these different examples in it, because each one is also I check that they still look right. The source. So Frank talks about doc and docstrip and things. So I have one single source file. Now, docstrip is fine for doing that, but the problem is, so for the editor I use, the fact that my source is 18,000 lines long is a bit of a problem. It's certainly a problem finding stuff. So I have the current source has all the user documentation and then all the source code and the code documentation, and that's fine for a short package, but it's probably not ideal for something that's quite as big. And it's still too slow, and that partly links to some of this, and it partly links to some structures internally, which I've realized can be done better. So I've started again, or I've been working for a few years on thinking I needed to I started in 2014, but it's kind of dragged because I've been doing other things, and I've kind of oscillated in whether I think it's actually doable. I'm back to thinking it is doable. Yes, how the font detection works, yeah. So this is the big change. So what we've got up to version 2 is, so you start a command, so you pick up what the current font is, and you can do that from things like the current value of the FAM or the NFSS data structures. You can look at effort family, effort whatever, and you can pick up what's going on. You store that information, then you start, it's some AMS text, it's an M-box, then you do ensure math, and then if you want to print in text mode, you do text again, and then you put in some font command like mathrm or rm family and things. So you start by completely reset. The reason for all of this is if bold math is active and you want to prevent bold math being active, you have to switch out of math mode into text mode and then back to math mode in order for that to work, because you need a separate math formula. And so that's why all that is done. But it's imposed every time. And the problem with that is it means I'm getting tech to do lots of work on fonts. Frank's pulling a face. And it's a bit of a nightmare to follow what's happening. So the plan in version 3 is that you set any aspects that are needed, but you leave everything else alone, and you only put stuff in the box if you need to change the math version. So that's particularly useful for things like sans math, which currently doesn't work very well because I changed the math version sort of arbitrarily, and if someone's got sans math going on, that doesn't really work. The sans math package sets the math version to sans, and it gets messed up. So this is a completely different approach. It cuts down on the font changes a lot, but it will mean that some current stuff will probably need to be revised. So I'm still working on some aspects of that. So there's now a sort of code level interface. So here we are. So this is. I was hoping Enrico was going to be here because he's been complaining at me about lack of code level APIs. Hopefully Enrico's listening, or he can watch it later. So we now have. They're not finalized yet because I'm still working, still alpha at the moment. But so you think like siunitx unit formats at the code level, expl3 level, and here we have my. Well, I've made it joules per mole because joules per mole for Kelvin was too wide for the screen. And we put it into a token list, and I can show it. So in version 1 and version 2, things are kind of built up, and it's all a bit messy. So one of the things I decided for version 3 is the unit formatter should produce the same thing that you would type in if you were going to do the units by hand at a point where we can then actually extract that, and you could do further things with it. So So I think MathRM is the right choice. I was saying to Will about. I think it shouldn't be SimRM. I think it should be MathRM for units. So I'm hoping I've made the right call. So it's a bit. So there's quite a lot of messing around. So the code now is always going to produce this at the formatting stage, and then the printing code deals with when we're in text mode the fact that MathRM needs to be got rid of and turned into something else, because that's a printing issue, not a formatting issue. So I've made certain assumptions about that. They're all documented. There's a lot more code documentation than there was. What's working? So, core functionality, unit passing, formatting, real number formatting, tabular columns are done. I've kept the existing names. I inherited this one from SI style, I think. I've got some experimental stuff. I felt for a long time I picked the wrong names, and they should have been, this should be unit, and this should be quantity. I'll have to see. I'll probably have to provide a way of turning those off because I'm aware of another package that uses this. It's a package I'm not particularly keen on, but people will be using it. I also probably want to make this variable so that you can choose, because I think with hindsight I'd have picked n for number, but numprint was using that. But I'm hoping that if people are using siunitx, they're probably not using numprint as well. But I want to make that selectable, user selectable. That's not done yet. To do multi-part numbers aren't done. Ranges and lists aren't quite done. Not all of the font control mapping, and there's various compatibility settings. But I've got to the point, and I wanted it for this meeting, where you can use it if you're doing the basic stuff. So I'm going to upload, a bit later today, I'll upload an alpha version to my blog so that people, if they're interested, can try it out and tell me what I've got wrong. And hopefully the plan is to go for release somewhere around the end of the year as version 3. So it only remains me to thank various people who I've stolen code off. Stefan, who got me into this, and he's been my most consistent beta tester for 10 years. He's tested more or less every version. He's one of the few end users I've met as well. He came to Norwich once on holiday with his girlfriend, so we met up. So we actually talked about LaTeX. That's quite interesting. Danny Els, who wrote SI units. Martha Heldon, who wrote SI style. Harold Harders, who wrote numprint, that I nicked a lot of code out of. That's RC Col. David's code from dcolumn, I've nicked. Will for getting me into expl3. Tiltanta because I took some ideas from PGF keys to write L3 keys. And then Rico for pushing me to finally getting around to rewriting siunitx with a code level API. And thank you very much for your attention.
Any questions?
Well, it's not a question, but rather appreciation. I would say that one of the most useful packages that I ever worked with was your siunitx. It's something I use every day, and you saved me countless hours of manual formatting. I just cannot say how I'm deeply grateful for this package.
Thank you.
The package is bread and butter of a lot of books which are produced within this institute.
Yeah.
Very, very nice.
Well, it's not a question, but it's also a comment. And as it became a staple of this edition of TUG, us to make fun of David Carlisle, he would like to go back to you and say the summary of current talk. Joseph needed to rewrite the package as he wasn't using Emacs and the file was too big.
On the slide before this, you said that multi-part numbers.
Sorry? Yeah.
Multi.
Yeah, multi-part numbers, yeah.
Multi-part numbers, what is it?
Okay, so for example, if we have something with an uncertainty, so we have a value of an uncertainty, we have a value like that and we want to add a unit, then the unit should be like that, but some people want to show it so that's multi-part, and then if we have an exponent and things, so I know how I'm going to solve that, but I haven't yet done the bit that glues the stuff for putting units and numbers together is still just pretty basic at the moment. That's still got to be done. I know, and then some people don't want it repeating. So although it's mathematically incorrect, I have a setting that will let you do that because that's, it's like Boris said, that's what the user wants. You just say, okay, whatever. I'll just point out on uncertainties. One of the things I'm going to do for version 3 that people have been pushing me for years is currently uncertainties only cover this kind of single symmetrical uncertainty. A lot of particle physicists and astronomers want multi-part uncertainties or tolerances which are asymmetrical. I know how I'm going to solve that. I'm not going to do it for version 3, but I'm putting in the internals to solve it from version 3.1. The plan is about this time next year. I know how I'm going to do it, but passing the input is going to be a bit tricky, and I want to get the rest of it released first.
I would say that even with two multi-part numbers in tables work really badly.
Yeah, that's okay. So that's to do with how currently, because of the way I didn't point out, in version 2, I've used a property list for numbers and a property list for units. But because numbers aren't really open-ended, I know what the parts are. For version 3, I'm going to have a defined internal format for what a number constitutes and how it's formatted. And the way I'll do tabular formatting will be to use exactly the same routine as normal formatting and put some markers in for each alignment point. In version 2, it's not done that way. What happens is each part is pulled out separately during the table code, and that means I have to essentially rewrite the formatting code in 2 different places, and that's why you get into some problems. So that's another idea I've nicked from PGF Plot's table, actually. Ultimately, they do something similar. I didn't say that because it's not quite implemented yet. But yeah, I'm aware of that, and that's another reason for the rewrite. So that should be a lot smoother and faster, because that's a performance hit.
I'd like to sort of follow up on Boris's comment and also say that it's a wonderful package, but also it really stands out for the quality of the user guide. It's a well-written user guide that doubles as a reference manual, but without putting people to sleep. So it's really a model for how to write.
Now the funny thing is, I've had loads of people. The problem is when there's a bit at the beginning for the impatient, and when the complaint I get most is that whatever feature people want isn't in that bit. And it's like, and the problem is, look, every single user wants a different feature. I have to make some arbitrary decision as to what I think is most interesting or most demonstrative. Oh yeah, multi-part numbers also includes complex numbers, aren't done at the moment.
It has a solution for that. Don't use them. Don't make people use your packages.
Well, there is that, yes. Any more?
Thank you very much.